But another experiment that you took on, which I thought was amazing, was this practice of keeping a journal of small things. Can you maybe tell us about that practice and the impact this has had on your life?
So in any event, I started keeping that journal of small accomplishments, and it has had a tremendous impact on my life, Niall, because until that point, I was a guy for whom accomplishment meant the next big thing, right? Like, okay, so you wrote three pretty good books. You haven't written one for a few years. What's wrong with you? You know, why is this one taking so long, or et cetera, et cetera? You know, okay, so you just wrote another book. How are the reviews? Because if you're getting any critical reviews, you're a failure, and you need to write another book that won't get any critical reviews. It was always stuff like that, and it was killing me, to hang out in life, which a life which for all of us consists of a million small things that matter. How you treat the clerk at the store um, is as important as whether your book got well reviewed. Um, the impact we have on other people is vital and says a lot about who we are. And so I learned, to value the little things in life. And I'm so grateful for that at age 85, because at 85, this thing called human limitations does tend to set in. And, I used to be great at multitasking, or I thought I was. I was like a juggler. I could do five things simultaneously. And I just can't do that anymore. It's one thing or at a time, or it's just or it's just sitting and staring out the window. Multitasking is just beyond my reach. The flying around the country that I did for 40 years as an independent writer, teacher, and activist, that's no longer possible for me. Lots of things fall away as you age. And so if I didn't know at this stage of life how to value the small things in life, I'd be in a lot of trouble.
I think this is so powerful. And it seems to me what's happening is people that are very ambitious, a lot of the time they're deriving their self-worth from these big accomplishments that are projected into the future. Whereas whenever you develop a practice like this here, you're essentially flipping that around to developing your sense of self-worth from these small everyday things that you have direct control over and still moving towards these big goals, but feeling good about yourself as you're moving towards them, which is
Yeah,
just so empowering. And
well said. Absolutely. It's all about living in the now, isn't it? As a lot of spiritual teachers counsel us to do.
sure. Now, can you tell me what you mean by, I know this isn't your phrase originally, but can you tell me by what you mean by the phrase getting fierce with reality?
Yeah, that phrase I think came from oh, what is her name? Scott Maxwell is her last name.
Florida Scott Maxwell, is it?
Florida Scott Maxwell. Thank you. Yeah, and a passage in a book that she wrote about aging. I think she wrote it when she was in her 90s. Quite a remarkable book. Um, and roughly speaking, I think the passage says something like, all you need to do is embrace all you have been and done, and you will find yourself fierce with reality. If you have it right there, maybe you could read it. I don't know if you do or not.
I don't have it in front of me, no.
That's okay. That's okay. I think I roughly got it right just now. So it's all about embracing the truth about yourself and becoming fierce with reality. And I'm very drawn to the phrase because one of the things that was most helpful to me in coming out of depression was realizing, again, with therapeutic help, how many illusions I had been living with. Illusions about myself, illusions about the world, illusions that are generated by ego, by intellect, sometimes by our own sense of misplaced sense of ethics, sometimes even by our spirituality, especially if our spirituality is one that wants to lift us above the travails of life. And I realized that if you live at elevation in your ego or your intellect or your ethics or your spirituality, and you trip and fall, which we do every day, regularly, you have a really long way to fall, and you might kill yourself if you're living at elevation. And I think ego and intellect and ethics and spirituality often create a false sense of elevation. It's not to say those are worthless. It's to say they need to be managed and kept under control in service of real life. If you live on the ground floor of your own truth, the ground floor of the truth about the world around you and how you interact with it, you're going to still trip and fall, but now you don't have far to fall because you're on the ground and you can simply stand up, dust yourself off, and take the next step. And it does turn out, I think, in the long run, that life is a lot about falling down and getting up again, and falling down and getting up again. And to live your life on the ground, fierce with reality, that is, having fully as possible engaged the truth of who you are, which includes your limitations as well as your potentials. It includes your failures as well as your successes. It includes your dark nights of the soul as well as your illuminations. To live on the ground is the best possible place to live, precisely because you can get up again and carry on. And you're going to have to do a lot of that in life. Part of what took me into depression was living at elevation and then falling and finding I had a long way to fall, and it really hurt to hit the ground. So that was a huge learning for me. And the Florida Scott Maxwell quote about embracing everything that you are and have done, rather than having this image of ourselves, which is a sort of carefully curated image of all of my strengths and all of my successes and all of the ways in which I engage in self-justification, as contrasted with an honest look at who I am and the deals I make to get along, some of which compromise my own identity and integrity. To get honest about all of that is to find yourself on solid ground. I think the most solid ground that one can find in life.
Were there any parts of you that were particularly difficult to integrate? And if nothing comes to mind, don't worry about it. We can move on to the next question.
Oh yeah, a lot. There were lots. I mean, the depression was such a profound experience for me, because given the work I had done up to that point, the books I had written, the talks I'd given, I established a nonprofit called the Center for Courage and Renewal, which is still up and running 25 years later. I'd done all this work in the world, and when you do stuff in the world, you get projections from people. They imagine you, your readers, the folks who interact not with you, but with your ideas, or your projects. They imagine you to be a certain kind of person, and the person that they imagined me to be would not be a person who fell into profound depression and even considered taking his own life, right? That doesn't fit with people who write about the spiritual life. We're supposed to be happy and on top of it all, and just making the flowers grow every day. But that's not how life is. And so what I had to come to be able to do, and it took me time to do this, is to be able to stand up in front of people, either as an author or a speaker or a retreat leader, and without breathing up all the oxygen in the room, just be able to deliver a quiet message. I am all of the above. I am the guy who wrote the book that you love, and I am the guy who spent hours with his bedroom door shut, the shades pulled down, not able to get out of bed until 11 a.m., considering taking his own life day in and day out for a period of months. I am all of that and everything in between. And I got to the point where that was not difficult to do, because I had integrated all of it within myself, and I had come to understand how all of it has a place, all of it has a role to play in the way I live my life and in the way I do my work. And truth be told, I have evidence that going public about that, about the range of who I really am, didn't alienate my audience, but expanded my audience and got me more deeply connected with a lot of people. As you know, Niall, from reading Let Your Life Speak, I have a chapter there about my experience with depression called All the Way Down. And that chapter is not very long. It's maybe 15 pages. And it's in the middle of a book, and there are 9 other books out there. I probably have heard more about that chapter on depression than about any other single piece of writing that I've done. My book, The Courage to Teach, has launched some very big projects. So has my book, A Hidden Wholeness. It's not that these books haven't gotten traction. A more recent one, On the Brink of Everything, about aging, has also gotten traction. But that little piece about depression in Let Your Life Speak has brought in more email, more phone calls, led to more conversations of a really rich, engaging human sort than any other. So, Leonard Cohen is famous for a line in one of his songs about there's a crack in everything, and that's how the light gets in. Well, I think when we follow Florida Scott Maxwell's advice and get fierce with reality about our own lives, that we are all of the above, then I think the light gets in and people connect around that light.
It's on my to-do list to buy your book for someone, and the reason I'm buying it for them is specifically for that chapter, because they've just been through a really dark depression later in life, and that's the reason I'm buying it from. So there's so much power in actually just being open about these things, you know. And just to comment as well, it seems that trying to live and maintain a projection that doesn't actually reflect your internal world, it must be absolutely exhausting. And it seems like the process of getting fierce with reality and getting on the ground with things is like, it's messy and it's difficult, but that's the only way to sort of let go of the mask, you know, and that must be very freeing once you've done it.
I totally agree. That's my experience. Thomas Merton once wrote a line that he's one of my literary heroes. Thomas Merton is spiritual heroes. He wrote a line. He said, "Most people live lives of self-impersonation," which I think is just brilliant. You know, we have this notion of who we want to be, and we self-impersonate, and it is exhausting. It's like wearing, you know, it's like getting up every day and having to put on a mask and a costume and memorize our lines to be who we think we ought or want to be. And it is greatly relieving to just be in the world as yourself. And there's one other piece that I'll add on that, again, that has to do with me being 85. So at 85, you think about your mortality a lot more than you do at 75, 65, 35. And I can't, at my age, I can't imagine a sadder way to die than thinking as I took my last breath, I never showed up in this world as myself. I never showed up with my true gifts. I never showed up with my true limitations. I never squared with myself or others who I really am. What in heaven's name was I doing for the last 80 plus years? That would be a very, very sad way, I think, to check out. And while all of us lead imperfect lives, you know, wholeness is not about perfection. Wholeness is about embracing your brokenness, as well as what seems unbroken in you. That's what it means to be whole. It's not about being perfect. It's about putting your whole self into the human equation and growing as a result.
For sure. In a conversation with our mutual friend Eric Zimmer on the One You Feed podcast, I heard you mention something. I also, while we're talking about wholeness and sharing and vulnerability, you mentioned a quote from Carl Jung, which I thought is also important to bring up here. I want to get your comments on it. It was just that the soul, the soul needs its secrets as well. And can you maybe just give us a comment on that there and what your thoughts are in that regard?
Yeah, I deeply believe. I love a lot of Jungian thought. It was very helpful to me in my depression, and I deeply believe in this notion that the soul needs its secrets. So, what I'm talking about when I talk about showing up with your brokenness as part of wholeness, because that's how the light gets in. There's a crack in everything. You know, I'm talking about. I'm not talking about wearing your heart on your sleeve all the time, every moment of the day, about the latest painful or deadly experience you've had in life. So you just broke up with your dearest love. I'm not talking about wearing that part of your heart on your sleeve and going public with it. Not at all. There are things that we need to harbor within us in order so that they might come to maturation. Think of it as a pregnancy, if you like. Human experiences that need to come to term before they can be birthed as something that contributes to our living. So I think a lot of us, you know, have had heartbreaks in our lives, but by holding them internally until they came to term, when we were able to see what role that heartbreak might have in the living of a fuller life, so the heart gets broken open rather than apart. You know, it gets stretched and enlarged rather than shattered. Then might be the time, months, years down the road, to include that as part of your more public discourse about who you are and what has what has shaped your life. And again, I don't mean you do this from center stage, but maybe an older person is talking with a younger person about the younger person's heartbreak and has a word of insight to offer about how the younger person might hold that heartbreak in a way that allows for growth going forward. It took me 10 years from the time of my first depression to the time where I felt comfortable talking about it in lectures or in retreats or writing about it in a book. Um, and and I'm glad that I somehow had the wisdom to wait it out over that decade, because it took me that long to realize, oh, this is part of who I am. And if I'm comfortable with that in myself, if I can say that to other people in a way that doesn't, um, take me to the edge of a breakdown where they feel like they have to take care of me, if I can say that to other people in a way that comes from personal integration, maybe it will be of service to someone. And ultimately, I think the one way of healing our deepest wounds is to put them at the service of others, which loops back to a concept that's always been important to me of the wounded healer, which is a kind of motif that Jung messes with as well, an archetypal motif of, out of that wound comes healing for others. And for me, one of the ways you make meaning out of the hardest experiences of life is to offer them up for other people's healing, but not until they have become healed in yourself.
I think this is such an important point, and the metaphor I've heard this put elsewhere is that you should share scars, but not scabs, in the sense that if a wound is still open and raw, that's not maybe the time to be sharing it. Whenever it's fully healed and it's a scar, maybe 10 years down the line or 5 years or whatever it takes, then you can share it.
Yeah, we should not put each other under the pressure of, get it out right now, wear your heart on your sleeve right now.
Totally. Okay, just a few more to wrap up, Parker. What are your thoughts on navigating the balance between solitude and a life of community? Because you've been in both of those quite deeply.
I think for me, both of them are essential to life, Niall. And I hold them not as either ors, but as a paradox. The whole notion of paradox is very central to my living and my thinking and my spiritual journey. Paradox being a statement about two things that may seem to be opposite on the surface, but in fact are complementary to each other and needed. I'll sometimes liken it to breathing in and breathing out, this paradox that the body engages in every moment of our lives. And to take a paradox like solitude and community and to break it apart and to say, I think I'm basically a really community kind of guy, or I think I'm basically a really solitary kind of guy, is kind of like saying, I think I'm basically a breathing out kind of person, so I'll just do that from here on out. You break a paradox, it doesn't sustain life. And so solitude and community, I think, have this really powerful reciprocal relationship with each other. And they are together, held together, they are a very important part of discernment, including vocational discernment. There's some things that we need to sit in solitude with, to be sure, to kind of examine ourselves, explore our own souls, listen for the voice of the inner teacher, or whatever you want to call it, and then go into community to be with other people in a way that helps us sort and sift what we're hearing from within. Because not every voice within us is the voice of the inner teacher. We also have a voice of greed, a voice of fear, etc., etc. But to have both in one's life, and community, incidentally, doesn't have to be a big deal. I'm not talking about a membership group. It could be 2 or 3, 4 people with whom you have these trusting relationships and who know how to hold each other in a way that supports this inner listening, a way that doesn't pretend that someone else in the group knows what you ought to do or I ought to do with the dilemma we're currently wrestling with, but people who know how to hear us into deeper speech that in a way that allows us to hear ourselves more deeply. In the work of this nonprofit that I founded called the Center for Courage and Renewal, we do a lot with what we call Circle of Trust retreats, and we try to create this excuse me, this kind of space for people where they can listen more deeply to themselves. And one of the fundamental ground rules in our Circle of Trust retreats is that no matter what a person may say, no matter how problematic it is or how struggling it is, we are forbidden from attempting to fix, save, advise, or correct that person. We are forbidden from attempting to fix, save, advise, or correct that person. And of course, that takes away what we mainly like to do and know how to do when other people present us with critical issues in their own lives. The quick and easy thing is to hear what that person said and then say, oh, hey, that happened to me once, and here's what I did. Why don't you try this? And I'm sure it'll all work out. I kind of call that, drive-by counseling. The purpose is to get me in and out of the room as quickly as possible, pretending that I've paid attention to that person's need, but in fact, I've blown right past it and brought the focus back to myself. So in our Circle of Trust retreats, we say, instead of any of that stuff, fixing, saving, advising, and correcting, we can ask the person who's spoken an honest, open question. So somebody talks about a hard experience, and an honest, open question might be, you said you felt angry about what happened. How did that anger feel, and how did it manifest itself, and where was it located in your body? That's an honest, open question, because I don't know, there's no right answer to that question, but it gives the person who spoke about anger a chance to dig deeper into what he or she meant when they spoke about anger. So when I talk about community in relation to solitude, I'm not talking about a group of people who think they know what we ought to do. I'm talking about a group of people who know how to hold us in a way that allows us to listen more deeply to ourselves. And then it's back to solitude. I think, in solitude, we get closer to our own identity and integrity. In community, we start negotiating with the larger world in terms of what it might be evoking in us, which saves us from narcissism or solipsism. But being in solitude saves us from being so dependent on others that we're not living our own life. When you detach solitude and community, You get aberrations of both. So solitude becomes a kind of loneliness in which I don't even know who I am, and community becomes the crowd where I'm just lost. I don't have any sense of identity or meaning or relationship.
Yeah, I think it's a it's a cycle that's can be very tricky to navigate, but I think artfully navigating it leads to a very rich and fulfilling life, you know? So I wouldn't ask this question. I've never asked this question of a guest before, but I think you're the right person to ask. Um, Given where you are currently at in life and the life that you've lived, where do you sit with the question of, what is the purpose do you feel of human existence? Like why are we here? What are we doing? What are we doing on this planet?
That's a marvelous question. And of course,
I'm
it'll,
asking it sincerely. I really am.
yeah, I know that you are. I can feel the intent of the question. Um, I think life is an amazing gift, uh, all of it. Uh, Not only the glories and the delights, the falling in love and the devotions that we develop and the giving of ourselves to this or to that, but also the struggling times, the dark times. Um, so if life is a gift, I think my reason for being here is to live that gift as fully as I know how and learn as much as I can along the way about um, a life, about myself, and about what it means to live the gift. Um, a gift is such an interesting thing. I didn't ask for it. I didn't expect it. I didn't sign up for it. I just got it. And when a gift comes out of the blue like that, um, the gift is immense as life. I mean, the opportunity to see what I've seen of the wonders of nature and of human nature, to see the acts of generosity and kindness and heroism that I've seen, as well as all the banalities of evil. Um, and to keep working on how I navigate that very complex force field, and equally so, how I navigate the, in some ways, even more complex force field inside of me. It's endlessly fascinating. And all of us have a vocation of one sort or another, or let me put it this way, all of us make an impact on the world in one way or another. And if we can make that impact in a way that um, shares the fruits of whatever it is we're learning about the world and ourselves, then I think that's another layer of why we're here, um, to, to, to share the fruits, either as a wounded healer or as someone with a kind of experiential wisdom that comes from someplace other than woundedness. Um, so it's not just writers and speakers and teachers who can do that. Friends can do it for one another. Um, Partners can do it in a loving relationship. Parents and grandparents can do it for children. Every profession can do it for the folks with whom they work. People in every profession can do it for the folks with whom they work. And so what it takes me to, Niall, in an inadequate answer to this big and important question is, if life is a gift, as it seems clear to me that it is, um, the call is to just keep passing the gift along.